Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spirit Goddess Spreading Awareness. It feels like it's been a minute since we've had a podcast, and I think this one is going to turn out to be really amazing. So tonight's topic is codependency, and I have somebody that's going to come up and also talk on the topic. We're going to give a little bit of facts, and then we're going to talk about life, because facts are always fun, but it's even better when you can compare it to something that you've lived through or people can compare it to. So that is what we're going to do. Right now, I am going to go ahead and send her an invite to get her up here. And then I'm just going to start with a basic rundown of codependency. Like, what is codependency? Codependency is a dysfunctional relationship dynamic where one person assumes the role of the giver, sacrificing their own needs and well-being for the sake of the other, which would be the taker. The bond in question doesn't have to be romantic. It can occur just as easily between parent and child, friends, and family members. The term codependency first appeared in substance abuse circles and described lopsided relationships that has been consumed and controlled by one person's addiction. It grew in popularity and became shorthand for any enabling relationship. Codependency is not a clinical diagnosis or a personality disorder and has sparked much debate and controversy among psychology experts. So now we're going to jump into what are the causes. That just sums up just a little bit. And remember, I'm going to say this again. I am not an expert. I don't claim to be a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a counselor. I'm just on here to help spread awareness and to get the facts out there. You're here. She's here. Sassy Nanny made it. Yes. All right. So all we did just now is just go over the basic definition of what is codependency. So the causes of codependency. It's thought to develop when a child grows up in a dysfunctional family environment where fear, anger, and shame go unacknowledged. The dynamic leads family members to withhold from expressing or repressing their emotions and ignore their own needs. Codependency may be more common among those who have experienced early life trauma or in close relationships with someone with a substance abuse disorder or have certain personality traits that make them susceptible, I knew I was going to mess that up, I knew it, to codependency. So there's many characteristics to codependency that can be broken down into many different forms and things like that. But I have 15 here, characteristics of codependency. Feeling responsible for solving others' problems. How many of us do that all the time? We feel like we can help everybody. We feel responsible. We feel like kind of like motherly, that motherly feeling. Offering advice even if it isn't asked for. Poor communication regarding feelings, wants, or needs. Difficulty adjusting to change. I know I'm guilty of that one. I hate change. Next, we have expecting others to do as you say, being demanding, being pushy, expecting to get what you want. Difficulty making decisions, which goes hand in hand with addiction. Chronic anger, feeling used or unappreciated. People pleasing, to be liked or loved. And y'all, as I'm saying these, we have seen so much of this lately. Like, I can't wait to get into the actual where we go back and forth and talk real life shit, because I mean, these are just facts for you, but we are definitely going to get into that in a minute. Lack of trust in yourself or others, fearing rejection or being unlovable, feeling like a victim, taking everything personally, lying to yourself and making excuses for others' bad behaviors. Guilty. General sense of helplessness, anxiety, or depression. So there's also a lot of symptoms that come along with codependency and can be broken down into many different subcategories. But there's 5 core core symptoms. One of them is difficulty experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem. I'm guilty of that one. My whole life, guilty. Difficulty setting functional boundaries. Again, guilty. Difficulty owning your own reality. Difficulty acknowledging and meeting your own needs, wants, and being interdependent with others. So I know I already did a episode on trauma bonds, but this is a huge example of trauma bonds. So I wrote this down. I'm not going to get too into it, but codependents may feel ashamed or too weak to leave their codependent relationship and feel loyalty to their abuser. This is called a trauma bond. A trauma bond often occurs when the abuser spins through cycles of abuse and affection. One day I love you, the next day we're fighting. One day you can stay here, the next day you're kicked out. Those are examples. These are some healthy steps to healing your relationship from codependency. Start being honest with yourself first, and then your partner. Stop negative thinking. Try not to take everything personally. Take breaks. Consider counseling. Rely on your support system. If you do not have a support system, you need to get one. It is very important to have people in your corner and to build a support system. And I don't care if it's only one person. As long as you have that support, you need it. Establish boundaries. This is a huge one. I know that I have been a bad one with that, in establishing boundaries, and not just in romantic relationships, but within family members and friends, and within all relationships of my life. Bootsy's coming to say hi. So, ending codependency. How do you do it? Moving from emotional dependency to emotional independence. Being able to love and validate yourself, recognize your feelings as needs as separate from others, attending to your needs, pursuing your goals and interests, and effectively managing your anxiety. You need to untangle yourself from other people, take a step back. The first person needs to be you. Owning your part in it, getting to know yourself and love yourself. Self-care is the biggest thing, you guys. I've always said to people, if you don't love yourself first, how can you love anyone else? How can you truly show compassion and love to somebody if you don't feel that way about your own self? And I have never loved myself compassionately, and that's why I'm not in a committed relationship, and that's why I don't want to be in one right now. That's why I stray away from it, because I know that I'm not ready. The codependent can suffer serious withdrawals when removed from the primary relationship or relationships, which can include mood swings, irritability, emotional and psychological distress, and depression. Treating codependency. First off, read about it. Read. There is so much information out there, and I'm not talking just about Google. There's so much information when it comes to mental health, codependency. I mean, there's so many little subcategories that we could break it down into, and we'll get there, because I'm not going anywhere. So read about it, talk with a professional, try to relax and reduce your stress. If you can point out the things that are your stressors, try to reduce them. Stay away from it for a minute. Begin to pursue and develop your own hobbies and interests. If you come up with a hobby that you enjoy doing, you're going to spend less time worrying about not having that other person, or, worrying about the situation. It tricks your mind into thinking about something else. Practice being honest about your needs and feelings, even to yourself. Sometimes I'm just as guilty. I don't do this either. I have resources here. I'm going to give those out, and then I am going to let Here for This say a little bit of what she, can you ask these for me, please? Ask what, sweetheart? I'm going to give my resources, and then I am going to let her, because we're going to read about some codependency some more. She has some more information, and then we're going to talk real life codependency and go back and forth and, talk about it. So right now I want to give resources, though. There is CODA. It is Codependence Anonymous. It is a thing. This is national. It's CODA, CODA.org. The number is 1-888-444-2359. Also, you can use the 988 Lifeline. Their website is 988lifeline.org. You can text or call 988 24/7, 365. I also have the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Administration, the National Helpline. This is also 24/7, 365. It is 1-800-662-HELP, which is 4357. I also have Canadian resources. The number is 1-833-456-4566. For Quebec, it is 1-866-277-3553. You can call or text wellness, and this is for adults, to 741-741. Or you can call 1-866-585-0445. Welcome in Here for This.
I had to unmute myself there for a second. I wanted you to be able to talk, and we have disruption in my household. I moved to a different area.
Oh, you're good.
I guess I'm going to kind of start out with how we even start to have this problem. A lot of children, it starts in your childhood, absolutely, in your home. Chances are one of your parents is going to be addicted to some kind of substance, whether it be a drug addiction, an alcohol addiction, and they could also be a codependent person living in the household. It's a learned behavior that it starts in your childhood. And you know how they say that, Dr. Phil uses a really great quote a lot about writing on the slate of children. Mm-hmm. Every day, everything you do, your children are watching it. They are taking it in, and they are going to use all of that as adults. So if this is going on in your household, chances are you are going to put out into the world codependent children. There's just no two ways about it. I myself had this going on in my household. My mom was a severe alcoholic. Then she I have to firmly say that once you have an addictive personality, you just replace one addiction with another. And you will claim that I'm over my alcoholism. That's not really ever true, because to this day she should not drink, and sometimes she does, and it gets out of hand every time. But then she moved on to prescription drugs. That was okay because doctors gave her those, so they were professionals, so that's okay. Then we went through shopping and gambling addictions. Some of it I didn't even live in the household with. But what that creates in a child is, first off, it's an instability. So you're never quite sure if your parents are all right with you, or you would come home from school and not know what to expect. And your children should know the daily routine of a household, and that doesn't exist in these circumstances at all.
No.
It's just a free-for-all most of the time, and you're struggling just to kind of exist and survive at that point. And what you end up having is that all culminates into a lifelong search for stability, affection, because you're lacking that because your parents are too wrapped up in being an addict.
Right.
Self-esteem, you're searching for that.
And this isn't us saying, that every parent is like this, but this is an issue for a lot of families and a lot of households, and it needs to be talked about more. you know, it really does. It starts, and somebody said in the comments, like sponges, and they are. Children learn, it is a learned behavior. Here for This said that as well. Another thing that Dr. Phil says, since you brought him up, that I really love, and I always tell people, and it goes hand in hand with this, is do not involve children in adult situations.
Absolutely. And when you are having arguments about somebody drinking in your household, like two parents, or this happened in my household a lot. I'm going to use it as an example. My dad would come home from work and my mom did some shady stuff. She would actually take and hide a liquor bottle in the toilet tank, in the back of the toilet. Can you imagine?
Oh my gosh.
Who would ever want to drink toilet liquor? But she did. I mean, she would hide it in there, and then she would use the excuse of having to go to the bathroom and then go in there and take, swallows out of a bottle. And my dad would come home and check the toilet tank, and then it was like a huge eruption that would happen. And it was so unsettling, and then you're kind of involved in it. And I remember my dad asking me, like, how many times has your mom been to the bathroom today? I'm supposed to keep track of how many times my mom went in the bathroom?
Right.
I mean, you're expecting a lot from a child.
Yeah, and then you feel involved. You feel like, oh, well, I don't want to tell dad because he gets mad when mom goes in the bathroom, and then as a child, and you already, I want to make this point up too. Children already, when they're at a young age like that, do not know how to process their emotions. Like, our brains are still growing. They do not know how to process the difference between I'm mad, I'm angry, I'm sad. And when all those emotions come to children all at once, that's when children explode, because they don't know how to process it.
Well, it also felt like you were having to pick a side. Were you going to be loyal to your mother and not tell?
Correct.
Or were you going to be loyal to your father and tell him?
Yep.
And that's a tough position to be put in for any kid. I mean,
it is.
But that was kind of what was going on in our household a lot. As I was doing research, I noticed that.
Sassy, can you mute just until Here for This is done, please, honey? I'm not sure if she heard me. Sassy, can you mute just until Here for This is done?
I'm trying to figure out how to do that.
Oh, okay.
How to mute it. Sorry. Oh, honey, if you click on your picture, it'll bring up a thing, and there's a microphone in the corner. You just click on that, and it'll mute you. Oh, okay.
There you go. Okay, go ahead.
There we go. As I was reading, I noticed that, like, the things that are different in my household compared to my parents' household are so extreme. So don't ever think that, like, oh, I'm destined to live this way for the rest of my life. Because if you educate yourself and you start to look into, the way things should be instead of, like, what you thought they were supposed to be. I think I got a lot of this as, going through college, too. I took a lot of psychology courses. Some of this stuff, I had epiphanies in the middle of a classroom, honestly.
Right.
But if you educate yourself and you get resources and do the work, you can change. This does not have to stay this way, because the comparison between our household and my parents' household is like day and night, and we'll talk about that later. But something that when I was reading up on this, I noticed that they called this a relationship addiction, but not to be, like, confused with a substance addiction or alcohol addiction.
Correct.
And it's not even necessarily a love addiction. The addiction is to what you will do to acquire love and maintain love and acquire self-esteem and acquire all the things that you didn't actually have growing up. Not physical things, of course.
Right.
And I thought that was really interesting that, like...
Yeah, somebody in the comments said...
addiction.
She said, I didn't have substances anymore, so I needed another person to validate me. And that's absolutely... I mean, that hits the nail on the head.
Yeah, and like I said, if you're having an addictive personality, chances are you're going to constantly replace one addiction with a different one. Even though they might seem less or not as bad as the other ones, per se.
Right.
You're still replacing them. I mean, I know there's been times where I've replaced things, like myself being addicted to, like, nicotine, for instance. I still use a vape. I mean, I've never really gotten over it completely.
Right.
I try to, like, suppress it, but I was trying to get off nicotine, I was replacing it with food. That's another addiction you can have, so it's,
which we're gonna get into a lot of that too, because somebody mentioned addictions, and one day I'm like, man, that can be broke down into so many subcategories. So we have like gambling, drugs and alcohol, food, like we have a whole list. So we're gonna absolutely get into that. Thank you guys for sharing your stories in the comments. I appreciate that a lot. Go ahead here for this. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, honey.
Oh, it's no problem. One of the things that I wanted to point out was that, like, a lot of the things that codependents are things that a lot of people find to be great. Like, you will find that most people who are codependent will be model employees. They will work their job better than anyone else that does the same job. They're going to be the best at it. They're going to be very reliable people. From the outside looking in, they're going to seem like they are very stable and they have their stuff together. But on that note, they also are going to have some things that you aren't even going to be able to see with your bare eye. They probably have poor health habits, like for eating and sleeping. They're going to more than likely have high blood pressure at some point in their lives, which is going to make you, not eating and sleeping and what have you is going to reduce your immunity. I found this interesting. Apparently, they have a tendency to overspend, which I have to say that is so damn true. After I read it, I was like, epiphany went off for me because I've seen this in my own life.
Yeah.
And they will also usually suffer from anxiety and depression. And that brought me to a question in my own mind, like, are a lot more people codependent than what we think? Because look at the rates of anxiety and depression, like, around us. How many people do we hear say, like, I'm so anxious, I have anxiety and depression?
A lot.
Is it because they actually are living behind closed doors codependently? We don't know, but
right.
It just rose that question for me. I'm very analytical like that. I like numbers and stuff, so I was like, I wonder what the percentage rate, if we broke it down, would be for... Are they actually codependent and that causes their anxiety and depression, or do they just actually suffer from a plain case of anxiety and depression?
Right.
I mean, I think they probably go hand in hand a lot.
They do.
And I just thought that was really interesting. And I will pause and let Sassy now. I mean, I could go on for 2 days if,
we'll let her come in and...
We don't need to do that.
Yeah, we can all say a little bit back and forth. Welcome in, Sassy. How are you?
Hello, ladies. I just want to say I grew up in a house that had, like, my mother and I lived with my grandparents my entire life because my dad was an addict. And, sorry, that's my granddaughter.
It's okay. Hey, it's life. If we don't got real stuff in a podcast, we're not lifing.
Literally, she's 3, so she's everywhere. But, and so she was very codependent on my grandparents and raising me because she had me at 19. And so then, because of her codependence on them, and she was in school all the time and working all the time, I always felt like I was getting no attention whatsoever because my grandparents were much older and they had already raised their 4 children. And so then I ended up having a baby at 16 because I just wanted to validate myself and get that love that I needed so badly.
Right.
Reciprocated back to me. And now ended up in 2 marriages and a very abusive marriage the second time. And my children now, I am seeing, are grown and in relationships. And I didn't leave a bad relationship due to my codependency. And now I'm seeing the same thing displayed in their relationships. So it's just becomes generational.
Generational, absolutely. Absolutely agree. I mean, I had the same thing, and I didn't even really realize it until I started doing a lot of digging and thinking about this and getting ready for the podcast. But my father was absolutely codependent on my mother until they separated. They were married for 14 years. She did most of the working. Ever since they've been separated, he did do a little bit of working and stuff, but he's always been codependent on all of the females in his life, every single one of them. He just left the last one and is now on his own. I don't speak to him anymore because he wasn't a present father and he's not a present grandfather, which is another part of the generational patterns here that happen. So I mean, and I didn't even, like I said, I didn't realize that until I actually sat back and started reading a lot of this and went, holy cow, my dad was really codependent on her.
Yeah, my dad was married 7 times.
Wow.
Yes, and he's passed away about 20 years ago due to his addictions. And
I'm sorry for your loss, honey.
And kind of like Here for This was saying, you know, he came home from Vietnam and went from one addiction to another, and ended up, he was a terrible alcoholic his whole life, and then got clean from that, but got older and then was taking prescription pills and then would say, well, I need them because they're prescribed, and this is wrong with me and that is wrong with me, which may be true, but was still abusing them.
Right.
You know, and then my mother, she was just never very, didn't give much attention. I think because she put the responsibility onto my grandparents.
Yeah.
And they were very old school and not like, you know, I love you, so I'm the opposite.
Very
I need
loving.
to be love bombed. And if I'm not getting all of that attention and all of that love bombing from the person that I'm with, I feel like they don't care about me, which makes it very difficult to have a healthy relationship.
Correct. Yep, I'm the same way.
I'm not in one.
I agree with you. I'm going on 2 years single. I did a year after my divorce from my ex-husband, which was very toxic. He was an addict and he was cheating and stuff like that. I tried everything I could to save it, but I couldn't. You can't save somebody that doesn't want to be saved. They have to help. They have to help themselves. You can't force somebody to do something.
No, I agree entirely. And it also seems that when you are codependent, that you attract people who are also codependent.
Yep.
Or people who have mom issues, men who have mother issues, who are looking for someone to validate them. So it's like a vicious circle.
I 1000% agree. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
Samantha, if you want to come up in the box, honey, you have a lot in the comments. I know. I'm not sure if you want to come up. We are recording for the podcast. If you don't, that's absolutely fine. But I just know I've seen you've had a lot to say, so I wanted to offer it. Anybody who wants to come up, if you want to share a story, you do not have to turn your camera on. But yeah, we're just up here discussing, this happens in a lot of households and in a lot of families that we don't even realize. Families may look happy from the outside, but what really goes on the inside, a lot of us don't know.
I'll tell you something that a lot of people might be able to relate to is my mom used to do something. Now, mind you, she was the one with the addiction. She used to do this thing where she would say to, like, for me, instance, there's some kind of thing going on, like, I don't know, let's say you wanted to go do something or whatever. She'd be like, well, I'll go ahead and let you do that, but don't say anything to your dad. And it was a very bizarre thing about, like, making somebody a bad person out of the situation.
Right.
And it wasn't very long ago, probably, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago, I had asked my mom if she would pick a prescription up for one of my kids. Now, mind you, we have insurance, so this prescription would have cost her like $5, which I would have gladly given to her. And she was like, yeah, I don't have a problem with that, but don't say anything to your dad. And all of a sudden, I had like a flashback back to like being a child and her saying that to me so many times. And so the very next time I talked to my dad, I said to him, I was like, hey, would it bother you if mom picked a prescription up for my daughter? I'm not going to say her name.
Right.
And paid for it. And he goes, no, it's a prescription. Why would I care? He didn't even ask me how much, mind you. Like, he did not even say, how much would it be? Nothing.
Wow.
And I was like, that's what I thought. And I was like, I just want to let you know something. And then I just kind of spilled my guts. And here sat my father, never knowing that was going on in our household behind his back. And it was a very manipulative tactic that she was using to kind of make herself look like the good guy and him look like the bad guy, even though I'm pretty sure he didn't care if I went over to my friend's house and swam at the pool or if I spent the night with so-and-so.
Right.
He didn't care about any of that, but she made it sound like, hey, I'm the good one. He's the one you got to watch out for, because she was the one struggling with the addiction in the household. And like I said, it was about 5 years ago when I finally, uncovered that whole cycle of lying that was going on within our family. And I couldn't believe that. I mean, here I am 40 some years old, and my mom popped off with, yeah, I can do that for you, but just don't say anything to your dad. And I was just like,
it really kicked in. It was like a light bulb, right?
Yeah. And I was just like, no, we're not doing this anymore. And I will tell you now, in our household now, there is nothing that my children come and ask me that I ever will say, oh, that's fine, just don't tell your dad. I will never have those words come out of my mouth.
Right.
And in fact, like, there's been times when they've been like, oh, this happened, blah, blah, blah. Like, I got in trouble at school, whatever it was. Please don't tell dad. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I cannot do that. Like, that is the first thing I say. I cannot do that. I will not keep secrets from your father. That's not how this household works.
No.
And the thing is I don't know why they would say that, because he's not the kind of person that would get upset, fly off the handle. There's not really going to be some adverse reaction that occurs. But I think it's just like they don't want to have to go through the humiliation. Why can't I say that?
Humiliation.
I can't say it. Jesus,
well, I mean, it's kind of like authority figure in school too. You know what I mean? Like, they don't want to. It's almost, somebody just said kids are taught to lie, and that's almost very truthful. And it's not even like they're telling the children to lie, but it's almost like they become afraid of authority, so they just learn.
Well, she was teaching us to lie, because she would tell us, don't tell your father. And so we were constantly like not telling him stuff, because we had this fear that there was going to be some bad reaction to it.
Right.
And like I said, it wasn't until a few years ago that I finally was like, hey, this is what's going on here. He had no clue any of that was happening behind the scenes. And I kind of felt bad at the time, but it definitely needed to be done. I will tell you, I've been thrown under the bus many times in these situations, like with my own parents. I mean, there's a rift that still exists there today because of some of the things that I'm just like, I'm not going to stand for that anymore, and I've let it out.
Right. Well, I kind of did the same thing. My family has been a lot of codependency, all of us. The only one I really have anything to do with anymore is my mother. She's my mom. She's never, she's always had my back. She is the one I tell all my secrets to. She's the one I can talk to about everything. So that, that's my support system right there. I stepped away from my father because, like I said, he wasn't a father figure. And after not being a present father, he was not a present grandfather. And to me, that was like, you already failed once. You already failed as a dad, and now you're failing as a grandparent. And that to me is not okay. Like, you had a second chance. And I was only able to have one child. So for you to fail my child, and on top of that, she lost her father in 2016. He unalived himself. So it's like she doesn't even have a positive male role model. Her dad's side of the family, they all have mental health issues themselves and do not take care of it. None of them are in therapy. None of them are on any type of medication. So, I mean, as sad as it does sound that it's only like the people that I am very close with, like my immediate family is really only me, my kid, and my mom. But it's not, because my life has become so much more peaceful since I have a lot of that stuff gone, since it disappeared. I don't have any more of the people going back and forth and arguing. I don't have any more of the alcoholism. I don't have any more of the drug addictions. I don't have it. I don't have to deal with it. And not
I believe you can make your own family. I mean, that's definitely the truth when people say that. And I will tell you that one of the things that my mom did also by doing that to me, like don't tell your dad stuff, she took away my support system, because then all I had was her, and she wasn't reliable. She wasn't somebody you could depend on. I mean, there were times where she was supposed to pick me up from school and stuff, and she would get too drunk and not do it. And then, you'd have to find some other way to get home or whatever. And so and then I'd be afraid to call my dad at work, because she would always tell me, like, oh, don't call your dad at work, he'll get mad, which wasn't really true, but she would tell me that. And so I believed that. So she took away a whole piece of my support system, and making herself the only one that I was supposed to depend on, and she was not dependable. So she like kind of snatched that from me by telling me this all the time. And I never really realized until I was really doing research the other day about, for this podcast, how screwed up and messed up and how codependent that really was. I never had put all those things together to like give them a name.
Well, and when I was looking it up too and doing some research, a lot of things that came up about, narcissist, and yes, very, very heavily in these situations, narcissists and manipulators are involved. And
I mean, they kind of go hand in hand.
They do.
Can't really be, well, there's a certain type of codependent that is very narcissist driven.
Yes.
The one that uses power and manipulation to like get what they want out of things. The one that has to have prestige and admiration. They're always perfect. They're never wrong. And that's a whole form of codependency. There's like 3 or 4 different types that I was reading about. And there's one that is exactly that. It's the narcissist form of codependency.
Yep. Somebody in the comments said, yes, open communication is key. Absolutely. You have to be able to, and that's one thing, I mentioned in my notes that you have to be true to yourself. You have to figure out within yourself who you are, what you want to be. It's almost like the analogy that I use, our life is like our car. You're the only one in control of it. If you feel like something is in your way and it needs to get out of your way, then steer to the left or the right, whichever way it is you need to go. If you feel like things aren't going fast enough for you, then hit that gas pedal. Or if they're going too fast, hit the brake and slow it down a little bit. But you're the only one in control. So it all starts with you. So if we get ourselves into focus and we work on ourselves first before trying to, and codependency goes hand in hand with trying to fix somebody else or feeling responsible for helping them. You can't. You absolutely cannot.
And sometimes you just have to let the thing play out as it needs to.
Absolutely.
Like, it's really hard sometimes to stand by and know that like a catastrophe is about to occur. Like you just know in your heart that's what's happening. But sometimes you have to let it happen. And chances are, if you are a codependent person, you are stopping the catastrophes all the time.
Right.
You're covering for people. You're telling lies for people. You're financially rescuing people. You will legally rescue people. Like you will get them out of any kind of trouble that you possibly can. All of those things kind of, it's almost like a natural thing for those people to do that.
Yes. We have definitely seen a lot of it lately. I don't want to dive too much into that situation on this podcast. Next week, I'm going to start separating them, actually. We are going to have, one day will be about whatever topic we choose and having our guests on. And the next day will be all about the other situation that we've been keeping everybody up to date on. I just want to kind of keep them separate because I am trying to do my own thing. And hopefully when that all either is taken care of or dies down, whatever, I'm going to continue on my journey. So I'm going to start making sure that they're separate and that we are helping everybody along the way. Even if this only reaches one person in the next week, in the next month, I don't even care. If it reaches one person and they listen to it and it helps them, then we have done our job. What needs to happen is, the reason I named the podcast Spirit Goddess Spreading Awareness is because more people need to spread awareness. Am I sitting up here saying I'm perfect and that I don't have any mental health issues? Hell no. I would never say that. I think everybody in their own way has their own mental health issues or has had their own mental health issues. People can get through them. And I'm right here, I'm proof of it. A few years ago, they had me not on the right medications and stuff, and I was a totally different person, completely different. When I went through my divorce and I came out of it and I got away from the codependency, being dependent on him, feeling like I had to have him around, even though he did nothing but hurt me. I'm guilty. I've been codependent. I've been there. So, I'm not sitting up here saying I'm perfect. None of us here are, we're not claiming to be psychiatrists or counselors, but we are telling facts and we're telling real life situations because it is a very common thing and a lot of people don't realize it.
No, they don't. I mean, there are a lot of things you can take and relate to, like, the whole tale of what we've all been talking about and how we all came together. We all know what that is. Well, I'm not going to say the name even. But if nothing else, this explains a lot of the behaviors of the people that are involved in the lore that we have been, telling on Reddit and what have you.
Absolutely.
And I couldn't help but when I was like writing some stuff down, I'm like, my God, that's this person. My God, that's that person.
Yes.
It's, if nothing else, it does explain a lot of the people involved in the whole situation.
It does. It absolutely does. Colton, what's up, sweetheart? I have not seen you in a hot minute. We're recording my podcast right now, but I wanted to give you a shout out. I also want to give a shout out to Kylie. I hope she's listening to me because she's been asking me, can you shout me out on TikTok? So there's your shout out, baby girl. You're on my podcast too. Well, she can listen to it later. I love you guys. We got a good 40 minutes of this podcast. I'm going to end that, but we're going to continue on TikTok. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you so, so much. I'm so glad you made it to this episode, and I hope you make it to the next. Good night.